Play ball!
The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
All right. Well, thank you for joining this very special edition of the Sports Stove Fantasy Baseball Show. This is what we have cooking. We're going to talk about strategies for those who are playoff bound. We are going to talk about standings and goings on in Major League Baseball. And, of course, we're going to have the most popular ads and drops. And, okay, I've got a very special guest that's going to be joining us to here. You're definitely going to want to pay attention. So let's get down to it, shall we?
Play ball!
All right. Welcome into the Sports Stove Fantasy Baseball Show. My name is Kevin Wilson, and I'm usually the co-host of this very show. Vince has the business to take care of, so I've slid over one chair, and I'm going to be not co-hosting, I'm hosting the show. Most importantly, I do have someone that's going to join us. He is a very good friend of mine. And he is a guy who is the defending champion in our league and in first place at this time in our league. So you're definitely going to want to sit up and pay attention. And here he comes right now. And he is, of course, Mr. Chase Thornton. And as I said, he is a very good friend of mine. I consider him a brother. So Chase, welcome on to the show. How are we doing this fine evening?
Hey, we're doing great. Glad to be back on the stove. Happy to be talking some baseball right now. It's been a decent stretch for my Brewers here and Vince's Brewers as well. So we're still represented. We're still well represented here on the show from a standpoint, a fan standpoint. But yeah, no, I'm excited to talk about some. I'm having another good week in the midst of another one. So not to rub it in after I took you out last week, but
yeah,
no.
We don't need to get into that part. So
you're having a better week this week, but we'll cover
I'm
that
having
later.
a much better week, and that's what I've always say. You take down your opponent without prejudice, which you certainly did do that. Yeah. And so we are going to start off by talking about some strategies in fantasy baseball, and this is a portion that we call the fantasy burn. All right, so Fantasy Burner is brought to us by Righteous Felon Jerky. We need to talk about that right off the bat because if you're into jerky, you need to get over to the Righteous Felon folks because they have very high quality over there. I'd like to say that I'm not just a spokesman, I'm also a client, but that is true. And so, but if you go over there and you put in at the end, go ahead and order up all you want to, but at the end, put your the Stove 15 as your checkout code, and you'll get 15% off your total order. Okay, so last week, Chase, Vince and I discussed strategies for those who are fighting for their very playoff lives. This week, I thought we'd switch over focus, and I think it's something that's very, very good that you're here because, as I mentioned, you're in first place and have clinched a playoff spot and a defending champion. So we're going to discuss strategies for those who are already in the playoffs, which should be a different strategy, I'm imagining, altogether. And since you are the guy who's bringing on the power in our fantasy league, so what would you say would be your very first strategy you would employ right now as you prepare for the playoffs?
Well, it's a little bit different take than one of the strategies that you guys talked about last week. Last week, Vince said right off the bat, and it's a good rule to follow no matter what you're playing: fantasy baseball, fantasy football, basketball, golf, NASCAR. Doesn't matter. Know your league. But whereas you guys were talking about know your league settings, make sure you know your scoring rules so that you can so that you can take advantage of them and get as many points and as many wins as you can when you need them. I'm talking about it more from the standpoint of know your league mates, know the people that you're playing against, and by now you should have a pretty good understanding of the kinds of moves that these people are going to make. If you're locked into the playoffs already, we're you're in coast mode now. You might be fighting for seeding, and that might be more or less important to you. But take a look at the guys that look like they're going to make it, guys, girls, whoever, who look like they're going to make it into the playoffs. Understand the kinds of moves that they make. Think about how they've gone about making their pickups, their waiver wire claims. How have they managed their pitching staffs? How have they managed their lineups? And try to keep that in mind as we near the playoffs here and coast into the playoffs here. Maybe you can usurp a couple of moves from them, make the move before they make it, kind of thing. Because when you're talking about the people who've made the playoffs, they probably haven't gotten here without making some savvy moves. So understand the kind of moves that your opponents have been making, so that they don't get the jump on you. You can get the jump on them. That's one piece of advice that I would have for this time of year.
Okay, that's very good advice right there. And I'm going to go in the opposite direction with I mentioned last week we kind of need to do, because last week we talked about, if you are fighting for your very playoff lives, you cannot be in love with any players.
No,
you cannot. It's time. If they're not doing it, you got to kick them, and whatever it takes to make the playoffs. But if you have yourself secure, you watch what players are being dropped. And an example of this I'm going to bring right up the bat is this past week, Hunter Green of the Cincinnati Reds went on the IL after pitching a very, very dominant game on Tuesday. He's gone on the IL as of Wednesday. It's a 15-day IL, and they're saying everything is going to look good. He's going to come off right at the start of September. Well, guess what? That is the first week of the fantasy playoffs. And if you have a guy that drops him because who's got IL spots open? Nobody at this time of year. And so let's say somebody drops him, and you're sitting there and you've got no worries or whatever, you can pick that guy up, stash him, and guess what? Now you've got a number one starter who's ready to go for that first week of the playoffs. So that's just an example of what I'm talking about. Just watch what's being dropped. And if you like them and you think they'll have some positive vibes for you when the playoffs roll around, pick them up and just stash them. If they don't work out, you can always simply drop them. So that would be my first thing that I would put across. If you are playoff bound, look who's getting dropped and add somebody that's to your advantage that you'll have already on your team come playoff time.
Yeah, so many times we look at, well, who got picked up this week. It's just as important, like you said, to look at who is becoming available, because if you've got these teams for whom there's no tomorrow, who have to be winning, they may have had to make a tough decision on a guy to drop who's worth having on a roster, but they may have needed the spot for whatever. You don't know. You're not managing their team. But it's worth it to look and see who's coming available right now, because you can pick up some gems that way. In fact, most of my pitching staff, to be dead honest with you, most of my starting pitching staff on my team is guys that I have picked up off of the wire as they've come available this year, as guys have dropped them for whatever reason, one reason or another. So yeah, no, that's definitely a great piece of advice. And you talking about Hunter Green going on the IL kind of leads us into my next piece of strategy, which is to manage your IL and use that to the fullest extent that you can at this time of year. Look at those guys who are going to be coming available, who might be, coming back from a long injury, who might have been on the 60-day DL or have been on the 10 or 15 DL for a while. Guy might have been dropped because of that. You've got the luxury to be able to make some moves like that. Stuff your IL full of guys who might be coming back. I've been carrying Jacob deGrom all year, waiting specifically for September, assuming I was going to get to September, and now he's a possibility of a big gun that I can pull out at that right time there. Jared Jones, a guy that had been pitching very well. I've had him on my injured list. There are guys out there who you can pick up and stash away that way that might be getting dropped or might have already been dropped, again, like we said, by a team that was desperate. So managing that IL to its fullest and understanding that you don't need to worry about necessarily the next 2 weeks. So you have the luxury of keep hanging on to guys that maybe can't be held on to lower down the standings. So manage your injured list. That's my next piece of advice.
Okay, so I had that, curiously enough, that was my second piece of advice. So I'm going to have to drop down to my third piece, which is monitor pitchers who could be on innings limits.
Yeah.
Okay. We're talking about rookies here mostly because, like, let's say you have Paul Skeens on your team, just for example, and the Pirates are hopelessly out of the race. So at some point, he's going to get shut down. And so if you've got him high up on your pitching, ratios or whatever it is, and all of a sudden he's not available because the Cubs have shut him down, that will not be good for your fantasy team. So there are several rookies that I would put in this, and Crochet of the White Sox has already undergone this just transformation. So keep an eye on if you've got rookie pitchers on your team, keep an eye on those guys. And if they come out and they announce, well, we're going to maybe put them in the bullpen or just shut them down altogether, you can go ahead and kick those guys because you've got people that you can, already put on your team or maybe add somebody, but they are of no help. Whereas people fighting for the playoffs, they might need to hold on to these guys until the bitter end. So that would be my next piece of advice. Watch your pitching innings pitchers.
Again, kind of piggybacking off of that too. I mean, it's the time of year where, as you said, teams are going to start dropping out of the race and realizing they're out of the race. They may start giving some of their younger guys looks, which means that some of your older veterans maybe might be getting a little bit less playing time. So it's worth watching those roster moves that are being made this time of year. Watch who's getting brought up, watch who's going to be getting more playing time and that kind of thing, so that you're not finding yourself dependent on a guy, that's whose workload is decreasing just as you need your points to increase. But that kind of leads me again into my next point. Last week, the strategies were all about the immediacy, and it's all about there is no tomorrow. So you have to play for today. Again, we're playing for tomorrow. So be watching for guys who might be getting brought up. Load your bench up with guys whose opportunities may be increasing here. You've got the luxury of being able to play with your bench spots. So do so. Find those guys, look for some of those guys who's maybe in the last 2 weeks, their usage has shot up, or maybe they've gotten themselves on the good side of a platoon, whatever, but load yourself up with those kinds of guys, because you don't want to be caught, like Kevin said, relying on people whose opportunities to score points are actually dropping because of innings limits, because of reduced playing time, because they're being put into a platoon now that a rookie's come up and they're on the short side of it. So just pay attention to those roster moves that are being made around the league that could affect the playing time of guys on your roster, or those hidden gems you can pick up and get yourself some more points here in the next couple weeks.
All right. So the last piece that I have is pretty simplistic, but it's true. And that is, if you have locked yourself in the playoffs, simply just continue to do what you've been doing all season. Because you are in a position, because of what you've done, your strategy has worked all season, so there's no reason to get radical at all. So just continue to do what you're doing, and you should be a success.
Right. Yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right. If it's got you this far.
Exactly right.
Yeah. If it's got you this far, in theory, you've been doing something right the whole time. Now, like I said, I'm not necessarily going to be managing as hard for wins, as maybe I would be if I were fighting to get in the playoffs. I'm still trying to win every week. It's a ego thing, but at the same time,
I totally get that.
Yeah. It's not like we're playing with real players in terms of like, oh, we can, right. If I don't start, if I don't start Shohei for a couple of weeks, maybe he won't get hurt. That's, we don't have, that's not the luxury we have. So just keep doing what you're doing, or keep using the knowledge that you have and the skills that you've already proven that work, that got you here. Yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't go radical unless you absolutely have to, but that was last week's show.
Okay, so that's all the strategies I had. Did you have anything further in this area?
No, that takes care of pretty much what I thought we should tell people. So
All right. So we are going to shift right now into what we call the call to the pen. Here we go. Okay, sometimes my fingers hit the wrong button. So,
happens to
all
get the
right.
best of us.
So this is the section we call the call to the pen, which is brought to you by SeatGeek.com. All right. They're once again, I've used this to my advantage to any kind of tickets that you're looking for, whether it be sports, concerts, whatever. Go to SeatGeek, see what they have, buy it, and before you check out, use the Belly Up Sports, and you'll get $20 off your purchase. Okay, so it works. It actually does work. So I can say that with confidence because I have done it. All right, so we are steaming. Baseball is steaming right towards September right now. And so I wanted to get into some standings right now because earlier in the season, it was pretty much there was nothing to talk about as far as standings because there were no division races. But that is certainly not the case now. All right, so the Yankees are currently playing, but entering today or right now, they're leading Baltimore by a half a game. So this is a battle I suspect that's going to go right, and I've suspected all season that's going right down to the wire. So do you give any advantage between these two teams when it comes to finishing first in the division?
Man, it's tough. It's tough. I'll tell you what, the Yankees are probably better on the road than the Orioles have been, but just slightly. I mean, you talk about two of the top three scoring teams in all of baseball here. They've got crazy run differentials. If I'm going to give anybody a slight advantage, it might be the Yankees just based on the fact that, yeah, they haven't given up quite as many runs yet. But I mean, you're talking about a couple of powerhouse offenses that at any given moment can go off for double digits in a game, make it look like a football score. Fun to watch, fun to see a team like the Orioles that's been down for so long bubble up to the top there and be able to challenge, especially in that division when honestly, every single one of those teams, even all the way down to the Blue Jays in last place, every single one of those teams is a fight to play against every single time you see them. So if I have to give the edge, I'm edging the Yankees, even though I don't want to really say that. I don't like saying that. Still some bad blood from when they were in the American League.
I'm with you.
When the Brewers were in the American League.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that because you're talking about terrific offenses. The Yankees are at plus 117 in the run differential. The Orioles are plus 88. So both are quality teams. Both are teams I don't think that you particularly want in the playoffs, but someone's going to have to do it. What about the Red Sox? They have fallen to 7.5 games out, and they are currently out of a playoff spot. Do you give any hope to the Red Sox fans that are out there that they can rally up and make the playoffs?
I mean, there's hope. I mean, there's hope. Again, they score a ton of runs as well. I mean, Vince keeps saying he expects the Royals to fade. Well, if the Royals fade, look who's next up in line right there. It'd be the Red Sox. I don't know that they have quite the firepower to match. They don't quite have the pitching staff that honestly either of the other two teams have in front of them. So I don't necessarily expect them to move up the standings in the East so much, but the wild card is, the wild card's right there. The wild card is right there. If the Royals do falter at all or the Twins, there's hope, but I'm not as bullish on them as I am with my Yankee call.
Yeah, me either. So that brings us to the Central Division. Cleveland had some struggles earlier, but they're at plus 80 run differential. Minnesota, 2 games back, all right, and at plus 71, all right. And so Kansas City is right there. They've gone 6-4 out of their last 10. They're at plus 102. And so I've been bullish on them. Vince could say what he wants about them. I've been with Kansas City all season. So these three make the playoffs in my estimation. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Red Sox fans, I'd like to give you hope, and there is hope. You're not out of it by any stretch of the imagination. We've still got quite a bit of time for a team to make a comeback from only essentially 3.5 games out of a playoff spot. But I mean, at a certain point, I've said this, and I've kind of said it in defense of my Brewers here, but at a certain point, a team just is what they are. And if a team's good, a team's good. Kansas City, we just said 109 plus 109 in the run differential. They don't give up runs and they score runs. They've got over 600 scored on the year. They're one of only a handful of teams that can say that necessarily. And they seem like they're a team that finds a way to win. I agree with that. Exactly what they have to do. They're not necessarily going to be the league best in necessarily anything, but they put it together and they do what they need to do to win. I can see them easily holding on to that last wild card slot there. The Twins, I think, have shown that they're legitimate. The Twins might catch the Guardians. Guardians had a rough weekend.
They're just too bad.
Yeah, Guardians had a rough weekend. They came into the series with the Brewers here on Friday with the best record in baseball, and then they walked out of town with their tail between their legs and got swept. Okay. And that's not necessarily to blow my Brewers up so much as it is to say the Guardians can be had. They're not going to run away with this division from either the Twins or the Royals.
I agree with that. Only 3 games separate these two, and so we move to the AL West, and Houston, as we and especially I predicted right from the start, even though they played pretty horribly early on. They are in first place. The Mariners had lost 5 straight. They won today, but they've slid to 4 games back. And Houston's gone 9-1 out of their last 10. So they're doing what Houston does, as we expect them to do. I like Seattle as a team, but I don't like what they're bringing to the table right now. I don't think they've got a prayer of making the playoffs.
It's not your dad's MLB anymore. Pitching is still important, but you're talking about the team that's given up the fewest runs in baseball here in Seattle. The problem is they can barely score themselves. Right. This is a team that has the third worst OPS in all of baseball among total lineups. They have the most strikeouts as a lineup. It's not a good hitting. This is a team that you want to target with streaming starters and that kind of thing. And we'll talk about some of that a little bit later, but this is a lineup you can target to be had if you're looking for pitching points and ratios, especially. Unless they prove somehow that they can start scoring some runs, they can get Arozarena and Rodriguez and some of the ship righted. I don't see it either. I mean, they'll finish 500, maybe a little above, but that's not going to get it done when you're talking about the caliber of teams that we've been talking about so far.
Yeah, especially when you mentioned about Randy Arozarena. They traded for him, and he's been absolutely brutal of late. And Rodriguez has had a hit since every game that he's come back, and I have to admit, he's been disappointment, especially to me, because I defended him right out of the gates, from the very first episode, my first article, and he's just disappointed, but maybe he can get something together. He's got hits every game, like I said, but it's not enough. Randy Arozarena has gone underground, and so when you look at Seattle, they're at plus 17, not plus 80, not 144, plus 17, which is a travesty given the pitching staff that they have.
Yeah.
So in the playoffs, the wild cards are Baltimore, Minnesota, Kansas City. Boston is 3.5 out. Seattle's 5.5 out. So I don't see them being able to pass anybody. So it's a battle between Boston and Kansas City and Minnesota. Yep. And I don't like Boston's chances either. So Seattle, it's been a great season pitching wise, but that's about it.
Yep. No, I agree with that completely. I don't necessarily see the standings changing. I don't see any kind of, historical charge up the ranks from anybody like the Tigers or the Rays. There's just not enough there offensively for Tampa Bay either to really make any kind of move northwards in the standings. So, yeah, I mean, if Boston can't crack that top three, no one else will.
Right, I agree with that. So then we're going to switch to the NL West, and guess what? We have a pennant race.
Yeah, we do.
The Dodgers and the Brewers, your Brewers played this past week, a 4-game series. Dodgers won the first 2 and had a 3-0 lead in the first inning of game 3, and they lost. They had the lead in the 8th inning and lost. So they finished 2-2. They went to St. Louis, beat them 2 out of 3. And so, but when you look at this, San Diego is 3 games out. They're 7-3 of their last 10. Arizona's 7-3 of their last 10, and they're 4 games out. All 3 of these teams, in my mind, are all playoff teams. Do you agree?
No, I definitely agree. I think that they've all got the chops to prove it by now. I mean, Arizona's pretty much there solely because of their offense. Or I mean, the best portion of why they're there is because of their offense. I mean, most runs in baseball, that team is cranking away. But the Dodgers and the Padres aren't any slouches when it comes to that either. And I mean, all 3 of these teams can do what they have to do to get there. It's going to be fun watching the run down to the end of the season. I don't necessarily know that San Diego or Arizona catch the Dodgers. I think the Dodgers seem like a pretty complete team. They seem like they might be figuring it out. They've been a hard team to read most of the year, Los Angeles. Just when you think they're going to take off, they kind of come back to the pack. And then just when you think they might be rolling over, they take off on a run. But the Padres and the Diamondbacks, seeing who can come out of that fight on top. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that for the rest of the season. And I definitely think that those 2 teams are just about locked in to playoff spots there. I think, again, it's a race for third in the National League wild card.
And last week we could have talked, Vince did, about the Giants. They've cooled down a little bit. I don't think they've got the bats. So
no,
I don't see, sorry, Dale, Vince's dad, that I don't see them making the playoffs. And then so we switch over to the Central, the Brewers, of course. And there's no reason to talk about any other team in this division because they're the only team that has a winning record now in the entire division. And so
open up an 11-game lead, biggest lead in baseball over second place.
That's right, 11-game lead. St. Louis, and this is amazing to me. They're at minus 61. How is a team that's second place in their division at minus 61? But that's all garbage over there. So the Brewers, and I see them as a legitimate team that could make a run and get to the World Series. Vince was like, I don't, that's their, his team and your team. I see the Brewers as a serious contender. How do you see it?
I don't think I'm being a homer when I say I agree with you that they can be a serious contender. I'll tell you that I really think that if they can snag one of those top, I mean, with the playoff structure the way it is now in MLB, if you can get one of those buys, if you're one of the top 2 seeds and you can skip that best of 3 series that seems to have been the bane of the Brewers' existence for the last several years, that opening round, if they can snag one of those top 2 seeds and get past that, get themselves into that next round there, they're a team that, is good at home, like good teams should be, but they've also been very good on the road, 34-28 away from American Family Field there. Again, best run differential in the National League, one of the best in all of baseball when you consider, things from that standpoint. They don't give up a ton of runs and they do score. The nice thing about it is that they've been doing it without necessarily superstars. That's tenuous sometimes, but sometimes it's the mark of a team that just knows how to execute their game plan and goes about their business. And that's really been, I think, what the Brewers have done this season. Unfortunately, they lose Yelich, for the rest of the year. So they don't have their biggest gun on the team, but they, again, seem to find ways to put things together. They don't get too high. They don't get too low. They lost 3 games in a row here. Including the 2 against the Dodgers there. And that was one of the rare times this season that they've lost 3 games in a row. So They've done a good job of just staying consistent. They got themselves to 20 games over 500 now. They don't have to worry about making the playoffs. So maybe they can play a little looser here over this last month of the season or so and get themselves in a position to not have to face that opening round of the playoffs that they've lost in, I think, 5 of the last 6 years. They've been knocked out in the first round, even though they've gotten there. So, there's not a whole lot of drama going on in the Central.
No, none whatsoever. And, the Brewers have actually passed the Dodgers because they're at plus 104. The Dodgers are at plus 100, and the Dodgers are supposed to have the offensive team, but the Brewers have scored more runs than them. So I think right now, as it stands, they're a more complete team than the Dodgers are. So, but
they
the
don't
Dodgers
have
have more injuries, that's for sure. Tyler Glasgow just went back on the IL, and that's something that Vince and I have talked about all year. Don't put your eggs in his basket. Unfortunately, that's come to be true. So we'll see. But
the Brewers aren't quite the star. They're not quite the star team that the Dodgers are.
Not.
But what it is it means that their ceiling isn't as high as the Dodgers. If you want to look at their baseline, but their basement probably isn't as deep as the Dodgers either in terms of swings. I think they're a very thick team in the middle and not necessarily, a real deep team.
I agree with that. So last is the NL East, Philadelphia, Atlanta 7.5 out. So there's really no need to talk about Philadelphia, even though they've skidded some over the last couple of weeks. Atlanta, they've gone 5-5. The New York Mets had a chance, okay, but they went 4-6. They're 9 out. So the Mets, any chance for them to pass Atlanta? Because that's the only chance they have of getting to the playoffs. I'm not a believer. How about you?
They're going to have to pass Atlanta, and their best hope is that, Atlanta maybe has been hit harder by the injury bug in terms of impactful, star power that they've lost games to injury. But if the Mets are going to get there, they're going to have to slug their way into it because they're not the same pitching staff that some of these other playoff caliber teams have. If the Mets are going to get there, they're going to have to slug their way to it. And they've got some guys that can hit. They got Starling Marte back just now off the injured list. So, they've got a little bit of their juice there, but it's going to be a tough pull to take down the Braves because the Braves are still Atlanta. That's a deep organization, a deep team. Even with the star power that they've lost to injury. So I give the Mets a puncher's chance, but not necessarily a better than 50% chance of being there.
Right. Okay. So the 3 wild cards are currently the Padres, Arizona, and Atlanta. And the Mets are 1.5 out. The Giants have faded to 4 out, as I mentioned. So I'm not putting a whole lot of stock in them. And so, football is trying to they're muscling their way in to our consciousness, but baseball, this is what we've got going on this week. These are the series. You've got the Mariners traveling to play the Dodgers. You've got Minnesota and San Diego. You've got Boston at Houston. Baltimore is at the New York Mets. So that's a tough assignment. You've got Cleveland traveling to play the Yankees. Philadelphia and Atlanta. So Philadelphia has a chance to maybe put Atlanta a little bit deeper into the grave. And then Milwaukee Brewers are at St. Louis, who have completely collapsed. So out of those series, which one are you most looking forward to seeing?
Listen, there's a lot of great matches, a lot of very good matchups here in terms of teams at the top of the standings. I'm kind of excited to see here these next couple of days what happens between the Orioles and the Mets, because I think they both could really use, a boost, a shot in the arm. If the Mets can come out of that, it's a home series for the Mets. If they can come out of that, having won that series, then we might start to pick up a little bit of belief in them. But that's a hell of a lineup to have to try to shut down when you've got the pitching staff the Mets do or don't have, however you want to look at it. Other than that one, there's some nice matchups, but
there are. And
Dodgers Mariners,
so
I think, should probably close the door on the Mariners by the time
I think
that's
so.
all said and done.
So if you've got the MLB network, okay, you need to be tuning in to see which of these games are on TV, because there should be multiple games going on right there. So that's something to look forward to. And I just wanted to mention, mostly because his last name is Wilson, okay? But Weston Wilson, okay, first Philadelphia rookie to hit for the cycle ever. Okay, he did it this past week against Washington, so I just wanted to throw that in there. And I want to get to our ads and drops, but I wanted to ask you, because baseball has this week announced that they're looking at a proposed rule change. And I don't know if you've heard about this, but their potential rule change is to make it so that starting pitchers have to go a minimum of 6 innings. And so I've made my thoughts known on social media, but I'm going to let you take the lead on this one. I want to know what you think about this proposed rule change.
My dad sent me a text earlier last week. He said, "Hey, he just had it pop up on a news feed or something, a reminder about the game when Juan Marichal and Warren Spahn played against each other, and each picked 16 innings in the game. Willie Mays hit a 1-run home run to win the game 1-0." And I said, "Yeah, you will never see anything close to that ever again. A 1-0 16-inning game is going to be pretty dang hard to come by. But B, you'll never see 2 starting pitchers both left in for 16 innings anymore." Fun thing about that game is, heck, you're just as likely that Warren Spahn could have hit a home run to end the game himself as anybody else in those lineups. But yeah, it just goes to show you, how far things have changed. We got a complete game last night from Luis Severino. Beautiful game, 8 strikeouts, but it's just a rarity. You used to have several, and I'm talking long ago, but you'd have several complete games a night. And now you're lucky to get a couple a week, literally league wide. Making guys pitch 6 innings, literally taking the ball out of the manager's, hands or whatever, or taking the decisions out of the manager's hands and not leaving him anything to manage really until the 6th inning. I'm not so sure I like the idea. I see what they're trying to do. I just don't know that that's the way to do it. They want to restore the prestige to the starting pitcher. Guys are not going to stop throwing 100 miles an hour. They're just not going to. A guy is not going to be saving himself because he knows he has to go 6. I don't think that's going to happen. And when you start playing cautious, or if you start trying to play below your play speed, your max speed, we always said this in football. When I played football, coached football, when you start playing cautious or holding yourself back in ways, that's when you invite injuries to happen. I don't know that you're going to prevent injuries by making guys pitch 6 innings. And if you're going to claim that you're all about player safety and you want to cut down on pitchers' arm injuries and those kinds of things, in forcing them to play in, deeper into the game than maybe they should. Now I've seen that they've had some possible, they've said, okay, well, injury, yes, obviously a guy doesn't have to pitch past that. Or if he reaches, maybe we set a pitch limit. If you reach 100 pitches by the 6th inning, or if you reach a certain number of pitches in an individual inning, those kinds of things that they would maybe override it. But it seems pretty convoluted to me. It seems out of the spirit of baseball. This isn't taking away the shift. This isn't implementing the pitch clock. This is something completely different. You're taking the decisions out of the manager's hands and not allowing teams to manage themselves the way they want to. I don't like that.
I'm not a fan. And as you mentioned, those 2 guys that pitched all those innings back then, the rule was still a pitcher had to pitch 5 innings to qualify for a win.
Mm-hmm.
So back then you had guys that would pitch, 15 complete games. Ron Guidry in one season had like over 20 complete games, but the rule was still 5 innings. So I don't know why you'd have to change that. And this is what I really don't understand, why they have to keep trying to mess with pitching when hitting is the problem. And I can prove that because do you know how many hitters currently in the National League are hitting 300?
Not a whole lot of them, especially now that Yelich is done.
Yeah, there's just one. One, and that's it. There are
Yeah.
6 in the American League that are hitting 300. That is a travesty.
Mhm.
Okay. If you go back years and years ago, you'd have maybe 15, 16, 17, 18 guys that are hitting 300. Now you have 7 in the entire major leagues. And so they did away with the shift, and hitters are still not hitting. So that's where they need to focus their attention on, to me. And because this is something, even if they did do this, it would be years and years away, because they'd have to implement this in the minors and get people stretched out
You
more.
have to
And
start formulating plans to make it to that point. You can't just snap your fingers and have that happen. No, I agree.
no. So yeah, so I'm not a fan of this at all. And I like I said, I made this known on social media, but I just want to get what your thoughts were on this, because baseball keeps kind of tinkering with things. Stop tinkering with the pitching. Okay, stop. And I'll leave it at that. So, any other things in baseball that you'd like to get to?
Well, I mean, we talked about the unfortunate Christian Yelich injury,
Yep,
those
we
kinds
did.
of things. Actually, yeah, there were a couple other things that happened today too, injury-wise, that we might want to watch out for fantasy baseball purposes. But I'll bring those up when we talk about our ad drops, because it
Okay.
ties into my ad drops. So
Okay, so we are going to get right to it right here. And that's what we call our fantasy focus. All right, so the fantasy focus portion of this show is brought to you by the bellyupfantasysports.com, where you can get to all of the fantasy sports issues, baseball, certainly football. I'm back involved with fantasy football. I've got some articles on there right now. And so if you're looking fantasy, okay, you need to get over to the Belly Up Fantasy website. And I just want to emphasize that, because there are some stuff going on. There's some great writers going on over there. And so get over to the Belly Up Fantasy website, and well, don't do it right there. Continue to watch us. But as soon as we're done, get over there. And so I want to talk about ads and drops, and Vince has made it a common theme that we will talk about the drops first. So I'm going to let you go first and tell me, who do you have at the top of your drops list?
this won't sound maybe quite so weird in the morning when we all wake up to the headline there, but I'm going to put Brandon Nimmo at the top of that list. He's 87% owned right now. He's had a pretty nice last 2-3 days here. He had a nice start to the season, but his last month has been rough. And if you've been paying any attention, you haven't really gotten any production on him for the last month. Anyway, he's got 1 home run since July 10th, and that just came a night or two ago. But the other half of the equation here, and one of the biggest reasons I'm saying this, listen, he just left the game today with shoulder discomfort. He's scheduled for an MRI tomorrow. So his medical situation doesn't look all that great coming up. You haven't gotten anything out of him for a month and a half here anyway. Free yourself up. Don't get locked in just because you drafted him. Keep an eye on that situation with the MRI, but even if he only goes on the 10 or 15 day DL, there's no tomorrow, and it's probably not worth the wait, considering what you haven't gotten out of him lately. He helped get you to the dance, but it's time to let somebody else take you the rest of the way. Brandon Nimmo. Okay,
so similarly, the guy that I'm going to have at the top of my list is at 85.2% rostered, and that's Isaac Paredes. I believe his name is not Isaac; it's something else. But I'm going to go with that for the time being, and that goes back into the Cubs curse that Vince likes to talk about. But he's currently 1 for 15. He's gone 6 games with 1 run, no RBIs, 1.0, -1, -1, -1, and currently he is day to day.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had him on my team, and unlike you, okay, I'm not locked into the first place of my league, so I cannot hold on to this guy and have him day to day and performing like that. I like what he can do and what he has done, but Isaac Paredes is not producing. He's hurt. We don't know the extent of that. I was looking to see if I get an update on it, but it was not forthcoming. But especially in our league, because we're a 10-man league. Let's make that clear to everybody out there.
Deep
if
league.
you're in a big league, you're not getting rid of Isaac Paredes. Yep. But if you're in a 10-man league, he can go, and you can add somebody that's better suited and healthy and hitting better. So Isaac Paredes goes to the top of my list.
There's Vince's council curse there, because Paredes hasn't necessarily. That was a big move. That was a big move at the deadline, and kind of threw some people for a loop. Like, why are the Cubs adding necessarily when they didn't look like they were going to have anything, to play for? They still don't. But in the last week or two here, Mr. Paredes has not given you any kind of production. So, maybe get out ahead of that one and save yourself some grief going forward.
Right. Absolutely agree. Who do you got second?
I just got done talking about what a powerhouse this lineup is here. But I'm going to counsel people to drop a member of this lineup. Eloy Jimenez there for the Baltimore Orioles. He's only 21% owned, so he's not necessarily all that widely spread, but he finds himself on the short side of a left-handed, he's on the left-handed pitching side of a platoon here with Ryan O'Hearn. It looks pretty well established right now. They're going to face a lot more right-handers than they are left-handers here. Plus, there's days when O'Hearn's giving you good offense no matter when he's in the lineup. He's one of the guys I actually picked up and got a little lucky with, in terms of that call. But, Jimenez has 2 runs and 1 hit this entire week here. And they even the same game against Boston. He didn't even play the last, 2 days. So, Eloy Jimenez, I know he's an Oriole. I know you want a piece of that lineup, but you might be able to find better pieces of that lineup out there. Either way, he's not going to be giving you a whole heck of a lot here for the last part of the season. So drop the Oriole glasses, the orange colored glasses.
Okay. Yep. Just go like this. All right. Okay. So I'm going to throw a couple catchers at you. Okay. One I talked about last week, and that's Logan O'Hoppe, who hit a home run on Friday. Okay. And you're like, yay, you hit a home run. Well, guess what? That's his only hit in his last 37 at-bats.
It's the only thing he did all week. Yeah.
That's right. Only hit in 37 at-bats, and I had him as a drop last week. So this is nothing new, okay? In the recent days, he's had 2 strikeout games twice. He's had 3 strikeout games twice, and he has a 4 strikeout game. This guy, especially as I mentioned in our league, we stream catchers, at least I do. And Logan O'Hoppe has no business being on your team, and the Angels are out of it. And my second guy is similarly, that's Jonah Heim from the Texas Rangers. Okay. And he has 10 at-bats this week. 10, okay? 2 hits out of 10 at-bats. And Carson Kelly is a guy that the Rangers traded for. He is taken over there as the starter. He's much better defensively. He's much better at throwing out base runners. So he is taken over as the starter. Jonah Heim, he's still too highly rated, too highly rostered. Both of these guys, are not going to solve your catching problems. Both of them need to go.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that at all. My next guy up here, next guy I'll talk about here. Speaking of guys on the short side of a platoon now, Lane Thomas, a guy who's been fun to follow. There was some hope when he got traded to a contending team here in Cleveland that he might be able to really make some things happen. But it has not happened. He's not getting on base even when he's playing. He's on, like I said, it looks like he's on pretty much the short side of a platoon now in terms of getting playing time, period. Even when he is on base, which isn't rare, he's not running as much. He's not able to steal as much as he was. And that was what was kind of making him so fun to watch here in the first part of the season. So, hey, it was a fun story. It was a good story. Let it go. Lane Thomas, drop him.
Okay, so I'm going to throw 3 pitchers at you just to move this along. Okay. First is Kyle Gibson of St. Louis. St. Louis has collapsed.
Yes.
And he has a 1.34 whip, which is awful. Okay. And then Jose Quintana of the Mets. All right. And last 9 runs on and 10 2/3 innings. He pitches against Baltimore this week. No thanks.
No.
And Nick Pivetta of Boston, who's at 65.7% rostered, and 5 innings or less, and 3 of his last 4. Tuesday at Houston. No, thank you whatsoever.
Nope. I would agree with every single one of them. Get rid of them.
Okay, so any other drops?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, so we're going to switch over to the ads. I'm going to start off, okay? And this is the guy that I talked about last week. He may not be universally out there. He's at 30% rostered in ESPN leagues. I like what he's doing. I like what he can do going down the stretch, and that's just Eduardo Rodriguez of the Arizona Diamondbacks, okay? And not too exciting. His ERA is 5.06, okay? 2 stars, 10 2/3 innings, 6 runs on 10 hits. Tuesday at Miami Marlins. It doesn't get better than that.
That's
unless
get right,
they're playing
Bill.
the Cubs or the White Sox.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you need to go and see if he's available in your league. If he is, snatch him, get him on your leagues and team some way. Eduardo Rodriguez I'm high on him, even though his ERA is still at 5. But I like him a lot, and I especially like him. But when the playoffs rolls around, goes into the strategies we talked about earlier. So I really, really like Eduardo Rodriguez.
Right. And between him and Merrill Kelly, now Merrill Kelly got kind of beat around today, but if the two of them can get themselves right, that would add a lot to that team. We already talked about him earlier. We know they can hit the darn ball. It's can they pitch well enough to make a serious run at things? If they can get Kelly and Rodriguez right, they really could. And if those two guys do get right, they could give you a heck of a lot of fantasy points as well. I like, especially Rodriguez. I like that.
Who do you got at the top of your list?
Well, I kind of brought up earlier that Seattle was in the bottom 4 in the league in both OPS and in strikeouts. Well, like I said, those are the lists that we want to mine in terms of starting pitchers for the coming week here. Guess what? There are 4 teams that are in the bottom 10 in both of those stats: the White Sox, the Mariners, the Pirates, and the Tampa Bay Rays. Well, one guy might get to pitch against 2 of those teams this week, and Kyle Harrison. He's only 30% owned, and he plays against the Chicago White Sox and the Seattle Mariners this week. Jump on that. In fact, I'm going to kind of give a blanket statement that Giants and Dodger pitchers, even the lower owned ones that we don't think about every day, they're good ads this week. They get to play, like I said, they get to play 2 of the worst hitting teams in the entire league in Chicago and Seattle. So I would be jumping on, especially if I can find some starting pitchers or some middle reliever type guys who might get a hold here or there.
Right. And so in our league, don't do it because Dale has swooped in already.
Dale
and he's the one playing this week. So I totally get why he did that. All right. So he was my second guy I had on my list. So I'm going to switch now. And this is a guy that I really, really, really don't understand how he's at 27.8% rostered, and that's James Wood of the Washington Nationals. I don't understand it. He's on my team, so once again, guys in our league, don't go look to pick him up because it's not going to happen. All right, so he's hit 284. Let's see. And this is what he's done in some of the last 14 games: 2 for 4 with 3 RBIs. 2 for 3 with a homer, 2 steals, 2 RBIs, 4 runs. 2 for 4 homer, 2 RBIs, 2 runs. 4 for 5 RBI, 3 runs. 3 for 3, 1 for 3, home run, RBI, 2 runs. This guy is hitting the ball all over the place. And as I mentioned, at just 27% rostered, I don't get it. And the Nationals don't play tomorrow, so maybe you can hold off until maybe the next day. But Tuesday, I would make sure this guy is on my teams one way, somehow, some way. Like I said, don't do it in our league because he's on my team. But Washington, they've collapsed, but he's hitting the ball all over the place. So I really, really like James Wood.
Yeah, no, I like that idea too. I mean, he's been, especially over the last month or so here. Last month, he's been producing very well. Jump on James Woods there. Yeah, I can go with that. Well, again, I already talked about Dodger, pitchers and San Francisco pitchers here. Another guy that I would be looking at right now is a guy that I actually drafted as my starting catcher. I know he's been on your roster, I think, a couple times this year as well. Keibert Ruiz. I drafted him to be my starting catcher because he fit the profile of guys that I was looking for. I waited on catcher, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and then I needed one. But I liked seeing Keibert Ruiz available there because he's a guy that gets on base and he doesn't strike out a whole heck of a lot. Listen, in the last week, he hasn't struck out. He had a home run today. In his last 49 at bats, he's got 3 strikeouts. Okay. Now he's a guy that doesn't run all that well, so he's going to ground into some double plays. So if you're in a league that penalizes grounding into double plays, he is going to do that occasionally. But like I said, look at his last, like, say, 2 weeks, 3 strikeouts and 3 grounded into double plays. That's 6 points that you would have been taken off of your roster. That's still less than half of the strikeouts alone that guys like Logan O'Hoppe, Tyler Stevenson, Kyle Bart, Cal Raleigh, Bo Naylor, guys like that have all struck out more than that. Twice that many times you've lost points from them as you are from Keibert Ruiz. So he's a guy that's not he maybe isn't going to get you, 10 in a game. He's not going to go off for those kinds of numbers all the time, but he's not going to subtract them by those negative point plays. He's going to keep you a good floor there. Keibert Ruiz, he's only owned in 45% of leagues there on ESPN.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about a Dodger right now. I want to talk about a player who has absolutely 0 at-bats so far this year. That's Tommy Edman. Okay?
Yeah.
They traded for him. He's on the Dodgers. He's going to make his season debut tomorrow. Okay? And everybody knows that Tommy Edman plays all over the place. And he's going to be a guy that's going to be in their lineup. And if you're in the Dodgers lineup, I like that. And so see if he's available. He's at 22% rostered right now. If he's available, go ahead, get him on your team. And because there aren't many Dodger hitters that you would want that are, available, but all the other ones are not. But this is a guy who's available throughout the land pretty much and will be in that lineup. So I really like Tommy Edman. I added him when they traded for him. I've been waiting for him to come around, and this is the payoff. So if he's in your league, go ahead and pick him up.
All right. Deep dive, Ramon Laureano, outfielder for the Atlanta Braves there. He's got 3 home runs in the last week here, and it looks like he may be starting to push Adam Duvall out of the Braves' plans. If you can take advantage of that now and get out ahead of it, he's literally owned in less than 1% of leagues, everybody. But if you've got that bench spot, we talked about our end game strategies or end of season strategies earlier. If you've got room, grab that guy. Atlanta's got to keep playing for something. They're not going to shut down anybody. They're not going to be taking their foot off the gas. There's still things in that lineup around him that he can, to do good things with. Ramon Laureano, a guy that, you might be able to stash here and get something out of here in the last month.
I agree with that. So the last guy I'm going to bring up, may be hard to believe, is a Pittsburgh Pirate. Okay. As I mentioned, they're collapsing over there, but they made a trade themselves earlier in the season. They picked up Isaiah Kiner Falefa. And this is another guy. If you're like, I'm not sold on Tommy Edman, maybe he's not available. Isaiah, he's at 9.7% rostered. He plays second, short, third, and outfield, so he answers the call in just about everywhere you could do it.
That's nice to have that positional flexibility too.
That's right. I love that. But he has to hit. But this 2 for 4 on Friday. Okay, he was 2 for 4 on Friday. Saturday, he was 3 for 4 with a home run and 2 RBIs. He has 4 2-hit games, and he had earlier this month 4 2-hit games and a 6-game stretch. So he can swing the bat. He can play everywhere. And so if he's available, which once again he is not in our league, so Dale, don't try and pick him up, or Nathan, okay? Because I already have him. So I really like him. He's a guy that's less than 10% rostered. So if you're in a league that he's available, go get him.
Yeah, speaking of big matchups in the league coming up, yeah, you and Dale next week. That's a barn burner. That holds major complications implications in the standings, I should say.
That's right.
I'll bring up by name here because I got a good feeling of it. I'm going to bring up by name one of those Giants pitchers I talked about earlier. Hayden Birdsong, everybody. He's only 7% owned. He plays the Seattle Mariners on Friday. And listen, he had a couple of really nice games earlier this year against Colorado on back-to-back games. Scored you 50-some points in terms of the 2-game stretch there. Seattle, like I said, terrible. Birdsong's got decent K to walk ratios. He's got a decent K per 9 ratio. Go out there, jump on Hayden Birdsong. It's a little bit of an under the radar move you can do this weekend. Give yourself a hand.
Okay. So as I mentioned, that's all that I had for those ads. Do you have any other players?
Good to go. Good to go.
Okay. We are great to go on this show. Okay. And so let us know where and when we can find you out there in the social universe.
All right. Well, if you were looking for my fantasy football content, it's all over at Fantasy Sports Advice Network. So head on over to the Fantasy Sports Advice Network. We're kind of a newer network. We've been around a little over a year now, but we were the title sponsors for last week's Fantasy Football Expo in Canton, Ohio. So you can find my stuff over there on Operation Domination with Dan Mader and a couple of the other boys that you know well here from Belly Up.
Of course.
But yeah, find us over there on Operation Domination for fantasy football stuff. We've got articles over there as well. That's the Fantasy Sports Advice Network. That's where you'll find me and my rankings and my articles and everything else going on. And we're ramping up because it's clock is ticking to opening day in football.
It is. So as I mentioned, I am on the for the most part. I actually wrote some articles that wound up on the regular Belly Up side, but for the most part, on Belly Up Fantasy side, I have two fantasy football articles that this very week are dropped over there. And I went ahead and I examined who has the easiest and who has the most difficult fantasy schedule to begin. Because if you're looking at a player and you're tied in all aspects, maybe who has the more difficult beginning schedule or who is easier might tip the scale. So you might want to get over there and check that out. This week, I intend to switch back over to fantasy baseball, so you will have an article from me on there. And you can always find me on X Twitter, whatever heck you want to call it, at Kevin62 WILSEA. So that brings us to a conclusion today on our show. We thank everybody that joined us. We thank our sponsors, Righteous Felon Jerky, SeatGeek, and of course, BellyUpFantasySports.com. We appreciate their services. And so, Chase, do you have any final closing words?
Nope, just it was good to be with you again, brother. And yeah, best of luck to everybody here as we count down the last 2 weeks of the fantasy baseball regular season.
That's right. So it's almost mind-blowing. It's 2 weeks left in the regular season of fantasy baseball.
I know.
2. Okay. And so Vince and I will be back next week and we will be back at it. So you can always turn here and find fantasy baseball advice. If you miss any part of this show, you go back and you can check out, as I mentioned, Chase, he brings the power. He knows what he's talking about. So you might want to take a look. And if you missed any part of that and listen to what he has to say. But other than that, we appreciate everybody that has joined us today or this evening. And everybody have a great week. And Vince and I, will see you back here next week. So thank you so very much. We appreciate you all.